Well, the plan is to tell a story, and to tell a story that would be enjoyable, entertaining, meaningful, and rememberable. That's the challenge. The subject, as you can see, is my B-17. 30 model cars, so you have an idea what the flavor was like in 1930. I did find a 1939 Willys at the Santa Barbara airport, and it's in the movie. I think, look This is the 1939 Willys coupe that we spotted at the Santa Barbara airport after we visit with the B-17 Flying Fortress. I had never seen a car like this one, and I wasn't sure what it was. In the beginning, I thought it was a Studebaker until I spent the time to try to figure out what the emblem on the hood was, and it turns out it's a Willys Overlander. They only built them for about 5 years. It's a very unusual car. This is the B-17 bomber. It is a quite unique bomber. It's actually very pretty and graceful. And the people who flew it during World War II said it was very responsive and very durable. It could take a lot of treatment. These are some of the pictures that I've obtained of the B-17 in flight for your enjoyment. Let's talk about the B-17. It was commissioned in 1933 with competition between it and Douglas. Boeing and Douglas were the two competitors, main competitors. There might have been a third one too, but the B-17 was first flew in 1935, and it met the criteria: a range of 2,000 miles, altitude over 10,000 feet, and a cruising speed over 200. So it was a good match, and it looked like Boeing had the contract. Unfortunately, Boeing's prototype, which is model number 299, crashed, and that caused the military to lose interest in the Boeing competition, the Boeing airplane. So what they did was they're going to give the contract to Douglas, and Douglas had an airplane that did fairly well the same thing, but fell short in range. So what happened is that the Secretary of War decided to go ahead and reinstate the B-17 anyhow, and so for the next few years they built them in very small numbers. By the time 1941 came and the Pearl Harbor, we only had 100 B-17s. But after that, we ramped up and we eventually built 12,700 of them. The B-17's main deal was to be able to fly into Germany and do precision bombing during the day. Well, this didn't work out too well because we had a high lossage. The total lossage of B-17s is 4,700, almost 5,000 airplanes. They don't sound too bad, but when you realize there's 10 people aboard, that's 50,000 airmen either killed or captured. That's bad. So they went to Eisenhower and they told him we're suffering really heavy casualties on the B-17. Our bombing runs are not working out. We're getting shot up. So Eisenhower said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to stop bombing. And they were pretty surprised that he would tell them to quit bombing, but that's Ike. So they stopped bombing in like November, October of 43, and didn't start bombing again and probably in January or February of 44. And during that time, they practiced to learn how to do things better, but they still had high lossage until they came up with a fighter plane that would escort them, and that was a P-51. The intent was the bomber would be able to fly into enemy territory and defend itself with all of the machine guns and bomb the target and return safely. Well, guess what? That was a good pretense, but it didn't work out. Turns out we lost a lot of airplanes. During the total build of the B-17, there were 12,700 of them made, and there were actually 3 production factories. The Boeing factory in Seattle, the Douglas factory in California, and also the Lockheed Vought factory in Southern California. All 3 of these factories were producing airplanes, and most of the work was done by what they call Rosie the Riveter, which was women, since all the men are at work. And the other thing that's interesting, all of these B-17s had to be flown to a destination so the men could take over, and a lot of the women learned how to fly them, and they delivered them. So you can't say the women don't deliver the goods. Until they came up with a fighter plane that would escort them, and that was a P-51. The P-51 actually was commissioned by England on a Lend-Lease deal that FD had worked out with Churchill, and they had purchased about 90 P-51s from North American, and when the contract was signed, within 108 days, North American had the first plane ready for tests. It turned out really well. The P-15 used the Merlin engine, which was built by Rolls-Royce, and it really is a high-performance airplane, and it had a reasonable good range. It had good altitude and good speed. It could cruise almost 400 miles an hour and could reach an altitude of 28,000 feet. It still had a shortcoming. The range was short in those days, so they added another gas tank between the pilot, which gives them 85 more gallons, which extended the range. But the ultimate fix to get the ultimate range was a thing called the drop tanks. They started using the drop tanks over in Europe, and what they do is they have two drop tanks on the P-51, and they'd fly into enemy territory, and when they encountered the enemy, they would drop the tanks and have a combat. Then they'd have enough gas to get home safely, and this stopped the ravaging of the B-17s. The secret of the B-17 was the Norden bombsight. Well, let's see where we're at in our story. Like I said, it's important to have a good story. And I've tried to have a good story about a subject that is kind of interesting from the standpoint. We went to the Santa Barbara airport and visited a B-17. The Santa Barbara airport hosted the B-17 for 2 or 3 days, and for a couple $100 you could take a ride on it if you felt like it. I didn't quite feel like riding on that antique airplane. This is the B-17 that was here in Santa Barbara, and there's your truly climbing aboard. I checked out everything on this B-17 possible. This is about 20 years ago, and I felt a lot different. There's the bomb bay, and it's open with a couple of bombs hanging in there. You would not believe how small the plane is. There I'm standing by, I'm a waist gunner on each side. You notice it's open. Can you imagine how cold that was whenever it was raining at 20,000 feet? There's the bombs in the bomb bay. And there's the controls of this B-17. It's pretty old and antiquated, and a lot of gauges and a lot of things, but it's basically simple. You can see the throttles for the 4 engines, and you can see the yoke to pull back on it. Probably within the 6 months to a year, you can learn how to fly this thing. There's a much younger Wayne Reddick, and there's Tom, my buddy. He passed away, and there I am, another of me, a waist gunner. This airplane was very well tended, kept up very well, very pretty, and kept painted and looked pretty good, like almost new. In the background, there was a trainer that Tom flew when he was in the Navy to learn how to fly an airplane. I'm a little heavier than I was now, and I feel a lot better probably then than I do now. But time takes its toll. Tom passed away several years ago. You notice how tall the tires are. They're as tall as I am almost. Each one of these airplanes had a logo on the side that was their favorite things. One of them was called a Sentimental Journey. But you'll notice the airplane's well taken care of. And what's interesting, most of the people handling this were old, in their 80s, and this is 20 years ago. So I'm sorry to say, but probably most of these people have passed away that were very interested in supporting the B-17's legacy. It was a beautiful old flying bird. The Norden bombsight was really precision, and it was a top secret during World War II, and they was hoping the enemy never got a hold of it. It was very classified. It turns out the way it works, it's slaved to the autopilot, and when they get on target, the bombardier literally takes over flying the airplane, and it's flown through the Norden bomb site. So during that time, they're on course to do the bombing run. They can't deviate because the bombing is done by the Norden bomb site, and it's controlling it, so it has to go to fruition. Until the bombs are released, the flight of the airplane doesn't return to the pilot, so they could peel off and head home. The secret of the B-17 was the Norden bomb site. I've added in all these pictures of the Norden bomb site so you get a better understanding of what it actually looked like in operation. This is a very critical part of the B-17, and it allowed them to do precision bombing during the day. The autopilot was slaved to the Norden bomb site, and the bombardier actually had control of the airplane during the final approach of the bombing range. I thought it was important to bring this out because the key part of the effort to win the war was the Norden bomb site. Here's some continued pictures at the Santa Barbara airport showing the old bird. I think this was a G model, which means it was a later model than the first one that came out. I think this airplane wasn't that old. It probably came out in the late 40s. As it turned out, after the war, these airplanes were considered obsolete, and most of them were scrapped or turned over to the recycling for aluminum. So don't be surprised many times when you're having a beer, you might be drinking out of your grandfather's airplane. This is a very strange world we live in. A lot of people put logos on the side of their airplane for the fun of it. And one of the favorite was the Sentimental Journey, which is this aircraft here. This is a totally different airplane from the one that Tom and I seen. I went out there by myself and visited this airplane. It was well worthwhile, and I enjoyed the visit. I think if I look at the big picture, this here little video camera and my handheld thing, I'll probably have to get myself an iPhone because it's super stable. That's amazing how that works. I am absolutely surprised. Wow, can you believe that? What a world we live in. We got a world that's killing one another, hates one another, and all kinds of toys to play with. It is one amazing new world. This is incredible, isn't it? All I need now, I guess, is a drone to fly around my head and take pictures of me from the high altitude. You know, if I ain't having fun, it ain't never going to happen. So what else? Have I covered all the bases? Remember this, we built 12,700 B-17s. We had 4,700 shot down. We built 15,000 P-51s, and the losses weren't that great. According to what the book said, the P-51 pilots said they destroyed 1,000 airplanes, 250 ships, and several other ground installations. So the P-51 served our country well, and it was in use all the way up into the 50s. The B-17 after World War II was considered obsolete because the B-29 replaced it, and most of the B-17s were scrapped and melted down and turned back into Coors beer cans. So next time you have a Coors beer or a 7-Up or a Coke, just remember, this is what your grandfathers flew over Europe. I hope you've enjoyed my video, and I hope you find it entertaining. And also, I have a link that I'd like for you to go to if you want to see a B-17 in flight. I think the days of the B-17s are coming to an end because we've had so many of them lost, and the people who flew them would be over 100 years old. So I think we're just about at the end of our rope. I've been working on this movie to try to give myself my personal pleasure, which is a lot of work, but it keeps your mind off of the things that might be bugging you. Anyhow, we did pretty good. Thanks for watching. I'll dub all this in and drop a bunch of the stuff that's not epical, get rid of the shaking, and we'll maybe have a good movie. Thank you. Well, you got to ask yourself the question, what are we all here for? One time a congressman was at an insane asylum and rallied out, what are we all here for? And it got dead silence, and he asked again, what are we all here for? And finally, way back in the back of the insane asylum, one guy hollered out, because we're not all here. There's a lot of truth to that.